All right, now we're getting into some of the more formal steps to create a nonprofit organization. So up till now, you've been developing the board of directors, you've written the bylaws, the internal governing rules for the organization, and now we're going to talk about incorporation. Incorporation is the process of creating a corporation, which is a distinct legal entity able to do business in its own name. The benefit, or one of the benefits of incorporating, is liability protection. So in the last section, the bylaws section, where I talked about indemnification, incorporation is the process that really allows that indemnification to take effect. So once you create a new legal entity, once you incorporate, that corporation can take responsibility for things when there is liability. It can step in and defend the lawsuit that's brought against individuals involved with the organization. So that's a big benefit for your board of directors. On the flip side, you've got responsibilities that come along with incorporation. So you'll have annual tax filings that you'll need to complete, and I'm going to cover those a little bit later in the presentation. But for now, keep in mind that incorporation, where before you were a group of people operating on a project or working towards a common goal, once you incorporate, you have created a new legal entity that can do things like sign contracts in its own name, open a bank account, apply for 501c3 status, and be known in the community and by your partners and funders as a separate entity from the people who are involved. You will incorporate the organization by filing a document called Articles of Incorporation. And this document is filed with the State Department of Assessments and Taxation, or SDAT. And once you file the document and it's accepted by SDAT, then you've created that new legal entity authorized to conduct business in Maryland. And you can file this document either by delivering a hard copy to State Center in Baltimore, or by mailing in a copy, or using their online system. And the filing fee for the base filing fee for any of those options is $170. And if you go into the office or if you do the filing online, there's an additional expediting fee of $50. So if you use that expediting fee, you'll either get the document approved that day if you go into the office, or within a few days if you do it online. If you mail it in, it takes 6 to 8 weeks, so it may be worth it to do the additional expediting fee. The Articles of Incorporation is less flexible in changes you might want to make than the bylaws were. So you want to use fairly standard legal language because this is a document that's going to be filed with the state. It's going to be public. So you want to include all the provisions that are required by law. And this is a document that Community Law Center has a sample of. So if you have questions or would like to see that sample, you can contact Community Law Center. So the sections you want to include in the Articles of Incorporation. First, you'll want to list who the incorporator is. So the incorporator is a person who their only role in the organization is to put their name on this document. They're saying, I, John Smith, am creating this organization, I'm incorporating it. So this person could be someone on the board, it could be the founder, and their only role is to put their name on this document and sign it. Once they've filed the document, that was their role as incorporator. Then that's completed, and then whatever their additional role in the organization is, they go back to that. This is where you'll want to include the name of the organization, and the official name is going to be what you include in the Articles of Incorporation. So make sure that you include, exactly how you want to be legally known here in the articles. And if you ever want to change this, then you'll need to file an amended set of articles of amendment. You'll also list the purposes of the organization here, and in our sample you'll see that we have some kind of boilerplate legal language saying this organization operates for charitable, religious, educational, or other purposes under Internal Revenue Code Section 501c3. So that language that we use in the sample is what we recommend, because then if you plan to apply for 501c3 status with the IRS, that's the language the IRS recognizes as charitable. So I'll come back to this in a few slides when we talk about 501c3 status. But for now, keep in mind you want to include that standard legal language and also more specific descriptions of what your organization will do. So you want to include language that's specific enough to say, here's what we do, here's why we exist, and what we hope to achieve, but you don't want to get so specific that you would need to amend the articles if you change your programs. So you don't want to say, we will be providing tutoring services to students in grades K through 6, because you may want to expand that later. You might want to say, well, maybe we're going to, also work with high school students at some point. So you might want to say, we're going to provide educational services, including tutoring, to students. And this might be an area where it's worth it to talk to an attorney to craft the language for your articles to make sure that you are falling within the IRS 501c3 purposes if you plan to apply for that status. You'll also want to include language granting powers to the organization, so stating that the organization has the power to grant donations, make loans, provide funding, accept funding and donations and loans, sign contracts, open a bank account, own real estate, and you can look to our sample for some examples of language granting powers to the organization. You'll want to list who your resident agent is and where your principal office is. So the resident agent is the person who is identified with the organization publicly. They're the person whose name and address are out there if someone needs to contact your organization. And they're also where the state and other people who are looking for your organization are going to reach out to. So if the state has information for your organization, tax forms, if there is a court filing and they need to serve the organization, it's the resident agent who's going to get that mailing or that service of process. So make sure that when you choose someone as the resident agent, it's someone who is reliable, involved with the organization, going to pass on any mail that they get from the public or the state to the organization. And you may want to change the resident agent every couple of years. You might want to have it be the president or the secretary, someone who's involved in the organization. But it is a $25 fee to the state to change that resident agent, so you may want to choose someone who's going to be in the same place, able to accept mail for the organization for at least a little while. And your principal office, if you don't have an official office, might be the same as the resident agent's address. And these need to be street addresses, not P.O. boxes. You'll list your initial board of directors, so you'll say at this moment in time, here's a snapshot of who is involved in this organization. You don't need to go back and change this as the board changes. So this is just saying, at the moment we're filing this document, here's who our initial board of directors is. You'll have a section on membership stating, okay, here's who who can be a member, and that might be the board of directors or it might be a larger group. And you'll have a section on dissolution. So this is something that is required by the IRS to be included in the Articles of Incorporation. If your organization ever closes down, ends its services in the future, all of its assets have become charitable property. So those assets need to stay charitable even if the organization dissolves. So if your organization is shutting down, you would need to find another charitable organization, another nonprofit, to accept those assets. Because once an asset becomes charitable, it must stay charitable. You can't split it up among your board members or your membership. You have to find another organization to give those assets to. You'll also include an indemnification provision in the articles saying, here's what will happen if this organization will step in and defend a lawsuit if someone in the organization is sued for something they do on behalf of the organization. And there will probably be limitations there. They have to be acting in the best interests of the organization. They can't be acting negligently or maliciously. So that's really important to include that indemnification provision. And you'll also include a reference to the indemnification provision in the bylaws. Once you've written the Articles of Incorporation, filed them with the state, they've been approved, then you are now a nonprofit organization, a non-stock corporation in Maryland. The very next thing you want to do after incorporating is hold an organizational meeting. And the organizational meeting is really just a chance to go back and say all of those actions that we took before when we were a group of people, when we were not yet incorporated, not yet formally organized into a legal entity, we're approving those actions now as the legal entity. So it might just take a few minutes at the beginning of your next regularly scheduled meeting. You don't need to schedule a separate meeting for this, but just go through and formally approve all the actions you took before. So it may just take 5 or 10 minutes to go down the list and say all in favor of adopting our articles of incorporation, and everyone will vote likely yes. Everyone in favor of adopting our bylaws, yes. Electing your board of directors and officers, choosing a bank, approving financial records, funds, and payments that you've made or that you plan to make, assigning duties and establishing committees, and approving contracts and other obligations. And then if you plan to apply for 501c3 status, you'll also want to authorize an application for that employer identification number, or EIN, and approve applying for 501c3 tax-exempt status. So I'll talk about those in just a minute, but it's really important for this organizational meeting and every meeting to take notes or meeting minutes of that meeting. So this doesn't need to be anything formal or complex or long. You just want to make sure that you are keeping a record of what was discussed and what the decision was that was made. So EIN, or Employer Identification Number, is like a social security number for a business entity. It is what nonprofits and businesses use to open a bank account, to communicate with the IRS. And you must have this EIN to open the bank account for the organization in its name and to apply to the IRS for 501c3 status. You can get this number by filing the Form SS4 online, and it's fairly easy to do, so once you've incorporated, you can do this. Meeting minutes, again, so it doesn't need to be in any particular form except what works for your organization. I wouldn't recommend including or creating meeting minutes that are just a transcript of the meeting. So it's not a good idea to just do a video or audio recording of the meeting, because there may be confidential things that you discuss that you don't want to come out if there is litigation in the future or if that does become public. So ideally your meeting minutes are a description of who was at the meeting, what happened there, what you discussed, what decisions were made, what the vote was, and if someone who opposes a decision requests it, the name of anyone opposed to a decision. The best practice is to have the secretary or some other person take these minutes, and then at the next meeting, bring a copy, have everyone look them over and approve them. If there's nothing to change, if they're an accurate reflection of the meeting, then they'll be signed and dated by the secretary and kept together with the other important documents and meeting minutes for the organization. It's really important to keep meeting minutes because even though you might remember next week what you decided at a meeting today, in a year from now, you might say, well, what was that meeting that we had? What did we discuss at that meeting, and what was our final decision?